Two Minnesota residents, Renée Good and Alex Pretti, have been shot dead by federal immigration agents. And serious questions have been raised about whether their killings violated federal civil rights law. So what has the Department of Justice been doing about this? Until recently, its leadership was obstructing attempts to open investigations in either case, causing a revolt by career prosecutors in Minnesota and at DOJ's Civil Rights Division who were trying to do what the law requires. 6 senior career prosecutors in Minnesota have resigned. I spent 3 decades inside DOJ. When career prosecutors walk away in numbers like that, it's a warning sign that justice is being undermined from within. According to multiple news reports, the resignations in Minnesota came after pressure from DOJ headquarters not to investigate, and after Department of Homeland Security top officials publicly judged the shootings as justified without any independent investigation. Finally, after enormous criticism from the public and members of Congress, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche announced that the FBI would investigate the Pretti shooting. This is a step in the right direction. This video examines what happened in Minneapolis and whether Pam Bondi's Department of Justice is playing politics at the expense of the rule of law. In my judgment, and in the judgment of others you'll hear about in a minute, video footage provides a clear basis for the DOJ to open a criminal civil rights investigation into the killings of Renée Good and Alex Pretti. The law is clear. Use of deadly force by a federal law enforcement officer is authorized only when the officer has a reasonable belief that the officer or others are in imminent danger of death or serious injury. Keep in mind that a suspect's attempt to flee does not authorize use of deadly force. Here's a still shot from a video of the Good shooting. It appears to show the officer about to fire. Note that it looks like Good's car had already passed the officer before he fired. Here's another still shot seeming to show the officer about to fire his gun for the second time. This time he appears to fire into the driver's side window of the car after the car passed him, and he seems in no danger. Department of Homeland Security policy requires an internal review of Good's shooting, but it's unlikely it can do so credibly because DHS Secretary Kristi Noem already prejudged the situation, vindicated the officer, and characterized Ms. Good as a domestic terrorist. Listen to what she said.
She then proceeded to weaponize her vehicle, and she attempted to run a law enforcement officer over. This appears as an attempt to kill or to cause bodily harm to agents, an act of domestic terrorism. The ICE officer, fearing for his life and the other officers around him and the safety of the public, fired defensive shots.
Even though the bias of DHS leadership is clear, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, who like Pam Bondi was one of President Trump's former criminal defense lawyers, said in a statement that there's currently no basis for a criminal civil rights investigation into the ICE agent involved in the shooting of Renée Good. In Pretti's case, footage shows he was shoved, sprayed with a chemical agent, beaten about the head with what appears to be a metal object, disarmed of a firearm he was reportedly licensed to carry, and then shot while unarmed, including at least 5 shots fired as he lay motionless in the street. In my professional judgment, the threshold for opening an investigation has plainly been met in this case as well. If you've seen the videos, you don't need me to tell you that. And when I say there's clear cause for investigations, that's all I'm saying. No conclusions should be drawn until there are full, independent investigations. Starting an investigation simply means prosecutors believe there's sufficient cause to examine whether a constitutional violation occurred. Section 242 of Title 18 makes it a crime for any person acting under authority of law, including federal agents, to willfully deprive someone of constitutional rights, including the Fourth Amendment right not to be unreasonably seized. Before any charge could be filed, prosecutors would have to prove that the officer's use of force was unreasonable and that he knew his conduct was unlawful. Such an investigation is typically opened by a local U.S. Attorney's Office with notice to the Civil Rights Division. If a case is of national interest, the Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division can require the U.S. Attorney's Office to include a lawyer from that division as co-counsel, and a charge in a case like that requires pre-approval. Video evidence like what's available in Minnesota normally prompts prosecutors to open a criminal civil rights inquiry. However, in this case, an investigation might implicate President Trump's immigration deployment strategy itself, causing him political harm. Attorney General Bondi's overruling of prosecutors seeking to open an inquiry has demonstrated that she's more motivated to protect the president's image than to protect the rule of law. The story of what happened in Minneapolis became even more compelling when Bondi ran up against DOJ prosecutors in the Minnesota U.S. Attorney's Office. They were people of principle willing to sacrifice their careers in defense of the rule of law. Take a look at this guy. Joseph H. Thompson, second in command at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota. Mr. Thompson and 5 other top prosecutors in the office resigned after Renée Good's killing. According to reports, Thompson intended to investigate the shooting as a possible civil rights violation in partnership with the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, a state agency that reviews police shootings. And it's normal for federal prosecutors and state and local investigators to work together. However, the same reports state senior Justice Department officials in Washington overruled Thompson's plan. And when DOJ leadership demanded an investigation into the political affiliations of Renée Good's widow, and not into the conduct of the officer who did the killing, that was apparently too much for Thompson and his colleagues. They quit in protest. Thompson is a Stanford-educated, non-political attorney with a stellar reputation. At the time of his resignation, he was overseeing the notorious state and federal programs fraud case that led Minnesota's governor to decide not to run for re-election. The resignations of Thompson and other top prosecutors is a tremendous loss for the rule of law in Minnesota. Tracy Mergen, a supervisory FBI agent in Minnesota, also reportedly resigned after being prevented from pursuing a civil rights inquiry into the Renée Good shooting. And several attorneys inside DOJ's Civil Rights Division also have signaled plans to resign, according to news reports. DHS policy requires an internal deadly force review of these cases. However, statements by top DHS leaders show they are not impartial. In the hours after Alex Pretti's killing, Border Patrol Commander Gregory Bovino said that Pretti was at the scene to, quote, do maximum damage and massacre law enforcement, end of quote. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem made a similar statement. Here's what she said.
An individual approached U.S. Border Patrol officers with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun. The officers attempted to disarm this individual, but the armed suspect reacted violently. Fearing for his life and for the lives of his fellow officers around him, an agent fired defensive shots. This looks like a situation where an individual arrived at the scene to inflict maximum damage on individuals and to kill law enforcement.
DHS has not released any evidence substantiating those claims. In reality, Alex Pretti was an ICU nurse at the Minneapolis VA Medical Center, described by his colleagues as exceptionally compassionate, kind, and dedicated with a focus on treating patients with dignity. What's happened in Minnesota under Pam Bondi's leadership is truly extraordinary. Career prosecutors rarely resign in protest over DOJ headquarters meddling in their cases. Before the current administration, I'm not aware of it happening even once. The resignations in Minnesota are not an isolated incident. In the past year, federal prosecutors in New York and at DOJ's Public Integrity Section resigned after DOJ leadership ordered dismissal of corruption charges against New York City Mayor Eric Adams, reportedly based on the president's political agenda. The interim U.S. Attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia also resigned, refusing to bring charges against James Comey and Letitia James that were reportedly being demanded by the president, when it was clear the evidence did not support prosecution. An alarm should be sounding in the mind of every person who values the rule of law, because DOJ's credibility depends on the independence and nonpartisanship of its prosecutors. And there are still many prosecutors at DOJ like those who resigned when mayhem in Minneapolis left 2 people dead, and when they were prevented from doing what the law required them to do. DOJ's announcement of an FBI investigation in the Pretti case is a step in the right direction, and it underscores the power of public opinion and congressional pressure. But there's more to do. Civil rights laws are not triggered by politics or public opinion. They're triggered by evidence. The rule of law demands consistency, and the evidence from both shootings deserves the same independent review. Attorney General Bondi must authorize a DOJ investigation in the Renée Good case. If you found this analysis helpful, please consider subscribing. And remember, where law rules, justice follows.